The pen didn't shake. Not when I signed the new will, not when I passed it across the desk to my lawyer, and certainly not when I looked up to see my daughter standing in the doorway, her lips parted, but no sound coming out. I'd spent years wondering how I'd feel in a moment like this. Turns out, it doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like peace. Earlier that week, we'd been sitting around her oversized kitchen island me. Her husband, the real estate agent she hadn't warned me would be there. She wanted to sell the family home, the house her father and I built from scratch. I opened my mouth to speak, but she cut me off with a tight smile and 4 words that landed like a slap across a lifetime. "Mom, your opinion doesn't matter." There wasn't anger in her voice. That almost made it worse. It was the calm of someone who'd made up her mind and decided mine no longer counted. That night, I sat in the attic alone, tucked behind an old trunk. I found it, the wooden embroidery frame, the same one I used to teach her how to stitch when she was 6. It still smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. I hadn't touched it in years. Funny, the things we keep even after we've been forgotten. So, no, my hand didn't shake when I signed that paper. It didn't shake because I'd already done the grieving, not for what I lost, but for the daughter who no longer remembered what it meant to hold someone's legacy in her hands. She didn't speak when she saw the final document, but her face said everything. And for once, I didn't have to. I wore the blue scarf she gave me last Mother's Day. She probably didn't notice. Her eyes were glued to the iPad, scrolling through listings for 3-bedroom homes in neighborhoods I didn't recognize. Dinner was her idea. A catch-up, she said, but by the time I arrived, the table was already half full. Her husband, her friend Melanie, and a man in a blazer who turned out to be a real estate agent. "Hi, Mom," she said, kissing my cheek while still texting. "We started without you. I figured you wouldn't mind." I smiled, the way I always do when I don't know where I'm supposed to fit. The conversation swirled around the table like I wasn't there. Square footage, school districts, market timing. Her husband chimed in about ROI and tax breaks. I picked at my food. Then came the moment. The agent looked at me and said, "You're the homeowner, right? What are your thoughts on selling?" I looked up. Finally, someone asked me directly. I opened my mouth, but she cut in without missing a beat. "Honestly, we don't need to complicate this. Mum's sentimental, but this isn't about emotion. It's about smart decisions." My hand froze over my plate. She kept going. She gets overwhelmed with all the numbers. But it's fine. We'll walk her through it later. We've got this. Then she smiled. Not at me, at him. I could feel the words pressing against my throat, aching to defend myself. Instead, I said the only thing I could without unraveling. "You know, I haven't actually agreed to sell anything." And that's when it happened. She set her fork down, folded her hands, and said calmly, like she was explaining something to a child, "Mom, not everything has to be about your opinion anymore." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. That made it worse. The room didn't go quiet because of what she said. It went quiet because everyone else kept talking like she didn't say anything wrong. No one looked at me. No one noticed I'd stopped eating. Only the real estate agent shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Later that night, I would stare at the embroidery frame in my attic and realize she didn't just take my voice out of the room. She'd been slowly writing me out of the picture for years. The next morning, I offered to help clean up after breakfast. She handed me a dish towel but didn't stop typing on her phone. I stood there, towel in hand, waiting for her to say something, anything about the night before. She didn't. Finally, I said, softly, "You embarrassed me last night." She blinked, like she hadn't expected that sentence. Then she sighed and leaned against the counter. "Mom, I didn't mean to," she said, brushing hair behind her ear. "But honestly, You make things harder than they need to be. You get emotional, and people don't know how to handle that. My chest tightened. I didn't know what to say to that. So I said nothing. She filled the silence with logic. You hold on to stuff that doesn't matter anymore. Like that old house, that embroidery junk. You talk like memories can pay property taxes. That word junk landed heavier than she knew. I stared down at the dish in my hand. She kept going. You taught me to be practical, to think ahead. I'm just doing what you showed me. I wanted to ask her what part of what I showed her included erasing people who loved you when they stopped being useful, but I didn't. Because in that moment, I saw something. She wasn't trying to be cruel. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She genuinely believed she was protecting me, even by taking decisions away before I could make the wrong ones. She'd built a life around performance, precision, and plans, and I no longer fit into the system she trusted. In her eyes, sentiment was weakness, history was clutter, emotion a threat to efficiency, so she minimized me, not to punish me, but to prevent her own fear of falling apart. That doesn't make it right, but it made it real. When she left the kitchen, I folded the towel carefully, placed it on the counter, and sat in the silence she left behind. There's a kind of grief that comes not from what's said, but from what's explained so calmly. You're not even sure you're allowed to be hurt. And that was the kind of grief I carried back with me that morning. The drive home took 40 minutes. I only remember the last 5, the rest blurred stoplights, street signs, that little antique shop I used to pause at on birthdays. The same one where I once bought her a silver thimble engraved with her initials. I'd planned to stop there again. I always did after hard conversations. I'd find something small, something thoughtful, and convince myself that gifts could soften distance. But that afternoon, I slowed near the corner, and then drove right past it. No hesitation, just forward. At a red light, I reached into my purse for a tissue and my fingers brushed against something soft, a spool of red thread, frayed slightly at the edges, tucked beside a folded grocery receipt and a stick of old peppermint gum. I must have grabbed it by accident from the sewing drawer when I changed bags. Still, it sat there like it had followed me on purpose. Once that thread had stitched names into pillowcases, mended doll clothes, bound birthday cards made of felt and love and little hands. Now it just sat quiet and irrelevant, like me. I glanced up. The light turned green. I didn't press the gas immediately. There was no hurry anymore, not to fix, not to prove, not to explain. For years I thought letting go had to look like slamming doors, raised voices, final words. But sometimes it just looks like choosing not to stop at a place you once found meaning. I turned onto my street. The afternoon light stretched long and low across the sidewalk. Inside the house, silence met me with arms wide open. I walked in, set my keys down, and for the first time in years, I didn't check my phone to see if she'd texted me something kinder after the fact. She didn't, and I didn't expect her to, not anymore. I hadn't been up to the attic in months. Dust hung in the air like memory particles, catching the light through a single square window. I climbed the narrow stairs with an ache in my knees and something heavier in my chest. At the far end, covered in an old quilt, sat the chest I hadn't opened since she left for college. I pulled the fabric back slowly. The latch creaked open like a voice that hadn't spoken in years. Inside, scraps of fabric, old lace trims, a box of buttons shaped like stars. And there it was, the wooden embroidery hoop, smooth, worn at the edges. One side still stained faintly where she'd spilled orange juice while stitching by my side. I remember the day. She was 6. She couldn't spell her whole name yet, so we practiced with just M. 2 crooked letters stitched in red. She beamed like she'd sewn the moon into cloth. I told her she had magic in her hands, and for years, I truly believed she did. I lifted the cloth gently. The threads were still there, faded but holding, but one corner had begun to fray. Not just wear and tear, moths. They'd eaten through the edge, right through the M. I ran my finger along the hole, not to fix it, just to feel where it used to be. The space where her name once sat was now empty thread, like the space between us. People talk about forgetting birthdays or forgetting to call, but there are other things daughters forget, like how it felt to be held for hours when your fever broke, how the hum of your mother's lullaby didn't always rhyme but always arrived, how something as small as 2 stitched letters could be proof that you were known deeply, intentionally. She didn't remember, not because she was cruel, but because she didn't have to. Mothers remember. Daughters move on. I folded the cloth back over the hoop. This time, not out of preservation, but because I no longer needed to remind her of what she chose to forget. Mr. Halpin's office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same brass lamp, same ticking wall clock that seemed louder every time I visited, same framed photo of his golden retriever wearing reading glasses. He greeted me with a warm smile. "You always come in with cookies," he said. "I figured this time I'd just bring peace of mind." He chuckled. I didn't. I placed the folder on his desk-worn edges, handwritten label, Estate. He raised an eyebrow. "You're not sick, are you?" I shook my head. "No, just ready." He opened the file and pulled out the last will we'd drawn up together 10 years ago. His voice softened as he skimmed the page. "You wrote this after your husband passed." I nodded. "I meant every word then." I leaned in, pointing at a paragraph near the bottom. "To my daughter, Emily, who taught me what it means to love with patience, I leave the home her father built and the legacy of our family." My fingers rested gently over the words. Then I pulled a pen from my purse and drew a single clean line through the sentence. No tremble, no pause, just ink replacing memory. Mr. Halpin watched without comment. I looked up. "She doesn't believe in legacies anymore," I said quietly. "And Patience doesn't live here now." He nodded once, then took out a fresh form. "Do you want to name an alternate heir?" I smiled faintly. "Let's just leave that section blank, for now." He began typing, his fingers swift over the keys. As he worked, my eyes drifted to the window behind him. Outside, 2 women walked past, arm in arm. One looked like a daughter, the other like someone I might have been once. Mr. Halpin slid the draft over. "You can take this home. Review it." I shook my head. "I already have." It was in the bottom drawer of my bedroom dresser, behind an old scarf box and 2 brittle envelopes from the IRS, folded 3 times, tucked inside a card I never sent, a card with a watercolour hydrangea and the words, "You'll always be my girl." I had written it the year she moved in with her fiancé. The house felt so quiet. I started talking to the walls. One night, I poured a glass of red wine and pulled out stationary cream-coloured, gold-trimmed corners. My handwriting was neater then. "Emily, I know I wasn't always gentle. I tried to make you strong. And maybe I pushed too hard when I should have listened more. I just wanted you to feel unshakable. In a world that often forgets women over 50 even exist, I wish I could take back the times I was too tired to smile at your stories, too practical to let you chase soft things. But I never, not once, stopped being proud of you, even now. I hope one day you'll look back and see me not as the anchor that held you down, but the one who kept you from drifting too far." I read it again. Every word. My fingers traced the last line where a faint smudge curved under my signature. "A drop of something. I don't remember if it was wine or something else. I never mailed it. I kept waiting for a better time. for a moment when she might actually want to hear it. But life isn't made of better moments, just ones we choose to meet or miss. I refolded the letter, slower this time. Before I slipped it back into the envelope, I added one thing, a single strand of red thread pulled from the embroidery kit upstairs. I placed it between the folds like a stitch that never reached fabric. Then I sealed the envelope and set it in the back of the drawer. Not because she might read it one day, but because I no longer needed her to. Some things are meant to be spoken, others are meant to stay whole by being kept silent. This time, I brought the embroidery frame with me, tucked carefully into a tote bag, wrapped in a faded tea towel she once used as a cape during dress-up. Mr. Halpin noticed it as I set it on the table. "New exhibit," he joked. I smiled. "Just something I'm not leaving behind this time." He gestured toward the chair. "Same format as before." I shook my head. "No, this one's different." He waited. I took a breath. I want the house to go to someone who'll understand what it meant, not just its market value. He didn't write that part down. He just listened like it mattered. I reached into my bag and placed the folded document on his desk. A list of charities, a friend from church, and one name in careful cursive, Maya Rose, granddaughter, age 14. He looked up. "She's a minor. She's also the only one who asked me last month what this was." I tapped the embroidery frame. She said, "Did you make stories with thread?" Mr. Halpin chuckled. "That's a better legacy than most people leave behind." I nodded. I don't want her to have the house yet, just the memory of it. So when the time comes, she'll know it wasn't always just bricks and taxes. He adjusted his glasses and began typing. Behind him, sunlight caught dust in the air like floating thread. I sat back, breathing in the quiet. No tension, no fear, just space. I signed the new document with the same hand that once stitched her name into cloth. No one was watching, no applause, just ink and intent. But I left that office feeling more whole than I had in years, because for the first time, I wasn't reacting, I was reclaiming. It came back to me while I was folding laundry. Not the bills, not the lawyer's words, but a small, quiet memory from a Tuesday in early spring. She was 7. We were in the garden, behind the house, same patch I still pull weeds from now. I was showing her how to trim lavender stems when the shears slipped and sliced the base of my thumb. She screamed louder than I did, ran inside, grabbed the first aid kit, came back barefoot and breathless. She knelt beside me on the dirt, tiny hands shaking, and said, "Hold still, Mummy, I got you." She wrapped the gauze like she was stitching magic. Every loop a lifeline. When I thanked her, she beamed and whispered, "Like how you fix things with thread." It was love, pure, unfiltered, urgent. And then, last month, same garden, same mother. I lost my balance bending too far for a weed and hit the ground hard. My knee twisted, my palm scraped. She was standing on the porch with her phone, saw the fall, walked over slowly, not alarmed. "Are you okay?" she asked, glancing at my hands. Before I could answer, she added, "You're fine. Just don't do the heavy stuff anymore, Mom. It's not smart at your age." No touch, no pause, no eye contact. Just assessment. Then she walked back inside, and I sat there on the same ground where her child self once wrapped me in care, realizing the thread had unraveled long before I noticed. It wasn't cruelty, it wasn't hate. It was distance dressed in logic, efficiency in place of empathy. She had replaced tenderness with strategy, and I was no longer a story she needed to stitch. There was no music, no candles, no speech, just the soft shuffle of my slippers on the hardwood floor and the weight of something I couldn't name. I carried the embroidery hoop like it still meant something, not to her, to me. The fabric inside had yellowed around the edges. The threads were loose where time had tugged, but the shape held. I set it gently on the kitchen table, the same spot where she once spilled juice across her math homework, the same table where birthday cakes had come and gone. I fetched a clean white cloth from the drawer one I'd saved for guests that never came. With slow, deliberate movements, I began to clean. Not scrub, not erase, just honour. Each swipe over the wooden rim felt like closing a door without slamming it. I wasn't trying to preserve it anymore. I wasn't hoping she'd come back and say, "I remember when we made this." That moment had passed. This was something else. A farewell without a funeral, a ceremony without a witness. I lit a small tea candle and placed it beside the frame. Not because I'm sentimental, but because fire reminds me that even quiet things can glow. I stood for a moment, just looking. No words, no tears. Just the sound of the clock ticking, the faint scent of lavender rising from old thread, and the memory of hands hers and mine once working side by side. I didn't need to forgive her. She hadn't asked for it. I didn't need to explain myself. She wouldn't have listened. All I needed was this silence and the freedom to mark the end of something without asking permission. I didn't expect a cake, not flowers, not even a phone call really, but I had expected something. I spent the morning as usual, fed the birds, watered the rosemary plant by the sink, read the same chapter in my book 3 times without turning the page. When noon came and went, I told myself maybe she was busy. Maybe she'd text after lunch. Maybe she'd forgotten last year too, and that meant this year would be different. By 4 p.m, I gave up pretending. I put on my navy cardigan, the one she always said made me look cosy, but not old, and drove myself to the little diner 2 towns over. They had meatloaf Thursdays and a lemon tart I liked. I'd gone there with her once, years ago, after a school play. The hostess smiled, asked, "Just you today?" I nodded and said, "Yes, just me." She sat me by the window. Outside, the sky was doing that late spring blush soft gold turning pink at the edges. I ordered coffee and nothing else. While I waited, I opened my phone, a habit, more than a hope. And there it was, her post, a long caption, a string of emojis, a photo of her husband surrounded by friends, balloons, and a cake shaped like a golf course. "Happy birthday to the love of my life. You deserve the world." Same day, same date, same timestamp I used to write on handmade cards with glitter that always fell off in the mailbox. I stared at the screen, not because I was surprised, but because it confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't forgotten. I was replaced. I closed the phone, set it face down. The waitress returned and asked if I was waiting for anyone. I smiled and said, "No, sweetheart. I'm just reminding myself I still matter." The next morning, I found a folded note in my mailbox. It wasn't from the post office, just a scrap of lined notebook paper slipped in between circulars and local ads. No envelope, no stamp, just 2 words on the front, from Maya. I opened it slowly. "Hi, Grandma. I know it was your birthday yesterday. Mum didn't mention it. I only found out because I saw your picture in the photo album I was reorganising for my history project. I made you something. It's not great, but I tried to copy the way your thread curls in that old frame. I'll bring it next week, if that's okay. Love, Maya." My breath caught not because it was elaborate, but because someone had noticed. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed, a name I didn't expect. Daniel, my son-in-law. I hesitated. We rarely spoke directly. His message was short. I saw the post too. "I'm sorry." I stared at it. No excuses, no explanations. Just 3 quiet sentences that felt louder than any birthday toast. Another ping followed. "She forgets a lot more than just dates, you know." I didn't reply, not because I didn't want to, but because I needed a moment to believe it was real. Daniel had always stood beside her, politely silent, faithfully aligned. But something had shifted. Maybe it was Maya. Maybe it was what he didn't say at that dinner. Or maybe even he had a line that felt crossed. That night, I pulled out a second embroidery hoop one I kept for later. I threaded the needle with soft grey cotton, not to start a project, but to feel something move through my hands again. And as I pulled the thread through fabric, a simple phrase came to mind, one I hadn't thought of in years. Someone still sees you. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The neighbourhood cafe still had the same sticky menus and wobbly chairs. It used to be our Saturday spot when she was 12 and too grown for cartoons, but not too grown to split a muffin with her mum. I hadn't been back in years. Not since she moved out and the house got too quiet, but something about that morning, Maya's letter, Daniel's message, the weight of silence lifting, it made me want to sit somewhere that held soft echoes. I brought a book. I didn't open it. Instead, I pulled out a notepad and began to write. Not a letter, not a will, just thoughts, what I'd keep, what I'd no longer carry. The things I used to say in my head when I was angry, I no longer needed to say them at all. A waitress passed by and asked if I wanted a refill. I nodded. Just a splash more cream this time. When she left, I caught my reflection in the window. Same lines, same eyes, but something softer behind them. I reached into my purse and touched the small folded paper from Maya. Not to read it again, just to remind myself it was there, and then, almost without thinking, I whispered the words that had haunted me for weeks. Not everything has to be about my opinion anymore, but this time there was no bitterness in the saying, no sting, no weight, just truth. I set down my pen, took a slow sip of warm coffee, and smiled, because for the first time in a long while, that sentence didn't sound like rejection. It sounded like freedom. The bank teller greeted me with a practiced smile. Here to make a deposit today. I shook my head, gently placing a manila envelope on the counter. No, just here to stop one. She frowned politely. I'm sorry. I slid the envelope closer. Inside, 3 years' worth of automatic transfer slips monthly payments to my daughter's joint household account. Tuition help, groceries, gap months between jobs, little lifelines I'd quietly stitched behind the scenes. But lifelines turn into leashes when no one remembers you're holding them. I'd like to cancel all recurring transfers to this account, I said softly. She nodded, tapping her keyboard. Do you need to notify the recipient? I smiled. No, she'll find out eventually. As she clicked through the forms, my eyes drifted to the glass window beside us. Outside, a mother was tying her toddler's shoelaces. The little girl leaned into her shoulder without asking. I remembered that weight, and how I used to carry it without complaint. When the teller handed me the confirmation slip, I folded it neatly and tucked it into my purse. Then I reached in and pulled out the soft fabric bundle I'd brought with me, the embroidery hoop, still warm from the morning sun, still mine. I placed it gently in the side pocket of my bag, not because I needed it there, but because it reminded me that even hands built for holding can learn to let go. No announcement, no closure scene, just a quiet exit. The kind you make when you've already said everything you needed to without ever raising your voice. I hadn't planned on seeing her that day. I was only dropping off a book for Maya, something old, with stitched edges and fairy tales too forgotten to trend. Daniel opened the door. He looked tired, not exhausted, just quietly worn. Maya's at choir, he said. She'll be back in 20. I nodded. I can wait outside. But he stepped aside. You can come in. She'll want to thank you herself. The house was cleaner than I remembered, more minimalist, more curated. I stood by the fireplace, Where once there had been framed photos, now abstract art and scent diffusers. Then I heard her voice, from the kitchen, familiar, brisk, confident. She said the investor meetings moved to Thursday, so we'll fly in Wednesday night. Just send the contract to my office. I turned slightly. She hadn't seen me yet, but Daniel had, and in that moment, something shifted in him. He walked to the shelf, pulled out a small boxwooden, old, familiar. I found this in a donation pile, he said softly, handing it to me. It was the sewing kit, the one she used as a child with her name stickered on the bottom in glitter pen. My breath caught. He didn't explain, didn't offer some grand apology, just handed it over and stood there waiting. Then a flicker. Behind him she paused mid-call. Her eyes met mine across the room. Not cold, not warm, just caught. She hesitated, shifted her phone slightly. I nodded. She didn't speak, and neither did I. Instead, I turned back to Daniel. Thank you, I said, and meant it. Because redemption doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in quietly through the front door, carrying something it almost forgot to save. Later that night, I opened the box. Inside, tangled at the bottom, was a single strand of red thread. The same colour we used on her first embroidery, the same colour I'd folded into a letter I never sent. Sunday afternoon came with a breeze. I was sitting on the porch, a mug of chamomile in one hand, the old embroidery frame in the other. Maya arrived with her sketchbook and 1,000 questions, as usual. She sat cross-legged beside me, flipping through drawings of imagined gowns and birds with human faces. I smiled. Still stitching stories, I said. She laughed. Only on paper now. I held out the frame. She blinked. I want you to have this. She touched it gently, as if it might crumble. I'm not very good. Neither was I said. But it's not about the thread. It's about remembering what you want to keep. She nodded, holding it like a secret. And then, a soft click. The front gate opened. Emily stood at the edge of the porch, hands full of takeout containers, eyes scanning both of us. I didn't know you were coming, I said evenly. She glanced at Maya. I thought you might want dinner. I brought chicken soup, the kind Dad used to like. I nodded slowly. That was thoughtful. An awkward beat. She looked at the embroidery frame, then back at me. I didn't explain, didn't offer context. She stepped forward, but I gently shifted my body between her and Maya. Not harsh, just enough. I'm spending time with her right now, I said. A pause. Then she nodded once tightly, left the containers on the porch railing, turned and walked away, without another word. Maya looked at me, confused. I just smiled and sipped my tea. Sometimes, I said quietly, you stop hoping they'll come back the way you need them to, and start teaching the next one how not to leave. Maya didn't fully understand. She didn't need to. She traced the edge of the frame with her finger and asked, Can I try the red thread first? I nodded, and just like that, I wasn't waiting anymore. The sun was beginning to lean low when I heard the sound of gravel shifting. Maya and I were on the back patio, thread in hand, her tongue sticking out slightly as she focused on pulling the needle just right. Slow, I reminded her. Tension matters more than speed. She grinned. Sounds like a life rule. I looked up, and there she was, Emily, hair-pinned, makeup careful, purse in one hand like a shield. She wasn't smiling. She stood at the gate for a moment, not quite stepping in. I didn't say anything. Eventually, she opened it and walked toward us, heels clicking too sharply against the stone path. Maya looked up. Hi, Mom. Emily gave a tight nod. Hi, sweetheart. Can I have a moment with Grandma? Maya glanced at me, then back at her mum. It's okay, I said, patting her knee. Why don't you wind the thread while we talk? She left us with quiet feet. Emily didn't sit. She stood beside the empty chair, eyes scanning the half-finished pattern on the cloth between us. "You're teaching her," she said softly. I nodded. "She asked." A pause. Wind rustled the lavender behind us. Emily looked down at her hands. "I've been thinking about the will, about everything." I didn't move. She hesitated. "I guess I just didn't expect to be left out of something that felt like mine." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, I saw past the voice, past the posture, and into the child who once sewed her name into felt stars. She wasn't cruel, just scared that something had moved on without her. But I wasn't here to comfort that fear anymore. "I didn't leave you out, Emily," I said quietly. "You walked past what mattered." She flinched, barely, then asked, "Can we talk?" I folded the cloth in my lap, smoothed the edges. "Another time," I said. "Right now, I'm in the middle of something that's actually being passed on." She didn't argue, didn't cry, just nodded, stepped back, and let the gate close behind her with a soft metallic click. She came by the next day. No call, no announcement, just the sound of the gate again. This time, slower. Like someone asking a question without saying a word. I was in the living room, sorting old fabric, deciding what to keep, what to let go. She stood in the doorway, eyes searching the space like a stranger trying to remember where things used to be. "I didn't mean for it to get like this," she said softly. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to perform pain anymore. She stepped closer, glanced at the pile of fabric. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning," I said, "unmaking patterns that don't fit anymore." Her eyes fell to a small scrap in my hand, faded blue with embroidered tulips on the corner. "I remember that," she said. "That was mine, right?" I nodded. "You used it to wrap your lunchbox. Said paper bags made your sandwiches taste sad." A hint of a smile touched her lips, then faded. She looked at me, finally steady. "I'm sorry, Mom." Still, I said nothing. Instead, I folded the cloth carefully, laid it flat on the table between us, then gently slid it toward her. She looked down at it, confused, cautious. "It's clean," I said, "and still whole." That was all. No lecture, no tears, no invitation to return to what was. Just a piece of cloth and a message in silence. "You hurt me. I survived it, and I don't need to carry it anymore." She reached out, took it in both hands, held it like it might disappear. Her eyes glistened, not overflowing, just enough. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to," I replied. Then I turned back to the stack of cloth, lifting the next piece gently, as if forgiveness too could be folded and placed neatly where it belonged. The room hadn't changed much. Same chair, same desk, same slant of late afternoon light cutting across the rug. It was the place I'd signed the new will, where my hand didn't shake, where I chose clarity over longing. Now, weeks later, I returned to that chair, not to sign anything, just to sit. The frame was there too, not in a drawer, not hidden in cloth, resting gently on the corner of the table beside a photo of Maya holding up her first stitched tulip. The threads weren't perfect, but neither were mine. I traced the edge of the hoop with my finger, not out of nostalgia, but as a kind of benediction. I wasn't grieving anymore. I wasn't fighting to be remembered. I had passed it on, not to the daughter who bore my name, but to the one who asked us softly what that red thread meant. There's a peace in knowing that you don't have to be understood by everyone to be loved by someone. Outside, a wind chime rang faintly, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't wish the phone would ring. I didn't hope for the gate to creak open. I just let the quiet settle in like a guest I had finally learned to welcome. Not lonely, not waiting, just whole. Dear Maya, by the time you read this, you'll probably be too old for fairy tales, but still too young to know how much they were trying to teach us. There's something I want to tell you, something I didn't understand until too late. Love doesn't always come back the way we give it, and the people we expect to remember us often don't. Not because they stopped caring, sometimes simply because they never learned how to hold what we gave them. But that doesn't mean we stop giving. It just means we learn who is ready to receive. You were, in the smallest ways. You asked, you listened, you stayed. And so, I gave you the only thing I had left that still felt whole. Not a house, not a will, but a thread. A thread you can use when the world forgets you, when people talk over your quiet, when someone says your thoughts don't matter. You don't have to argue, you don't have to shout, you just thread your story back into your own hands and keep stitching, because some legacies aren't passed down in documents, they're passed in silence, in cloth, in soft eyes that say, I saw you when no one else did, so here's my final gift, a thread, a frame, and the hope that you'll never need someone else's permission to matter. With all my love, Grandma. Have you ever chosen to let go, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally cared about yourself more? Tell me, what would you pass down that isn't money or property, but something only the heart understands?